What's up, all of you beautiful people from around the world? Welcome back to the den. Happy Star Wars Sunday to you. I'm, of course, Josh. I'm here with executive producer Al Schuler. Al, how we doing?
Good, man. Good. How's it going, everybody? It's good.
So, Star Wars didn't exactly have a huge presence at San Diego Comic-Con, but there was some really interesting stuff that did drop when it came to Star Wars. So we, of course, wanted to do a fan chat live and hang out with all of ye Star Wars fans and go over some of this stuff. So one of the first things that I wanted to get into, I want to start positive. So what I want to do is I want to start with some really positive stuff. Talk about the Charles Soule comic book, The Rise of Kylo Ren, because I think that's really, really cool. I want to talk about the Sith Troopers a little bit more because a lot of the discussion around the weekend has been around and has been resolving around the Sith Troopers. Because you and I haven't even talked about the Sith Troopers at all.
No.
Not any official kind of streaming thing. And then I want to talk about some things that aren't so positive eventually, talk about Dan and Dave, talk about the hype of Marvel's Comic-Con versus, what's going on with Star Wars and the big gap there, the big difference there. So, Al, let's start with this Kylo Ren thing. So, they announced this. Charles Soule had teased something on his Twitter, something like pretty big when it came to Star Wars. Something that was huge and significant. And Charles Soule, of course, very, very awesome comic book writer. He's done some of my favorite work with Star Wars comics when it happens. The Lando miniseries that he did is amazing. That I think it was a 6-issue miniseries that he did for the first year that Marvel started publishing new Star Wars stuff. It was incredible. He did the Vader run, which is just an incredible run with Lord Momon and stuff like that. And he announced, or it got announced at San Diego Comic-Con, that he's going to be doing a 4-part miniseries of comics that will be coming out in December, starting in December, for the Rise of Skywalker. So, Al, my question to you is, what do you think about this miniseries, and what do you expect that we'll learn in it?
Oh man, super hyped. I was a big fan of that Lord Moment comic. The Vader comic, that run was incredible. So, and I think it in reading those and checking out those comics, it feels like those are kind of breadcrumbs for what we might expect in episode 9, or at least kind of planting certain seeds and certain concepts, like the whole thing of the possession angle with Moment's mask and all that. So to know that writer's going to be handling kind of the origin story of Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren, dude, that gives me a lot of hope. Like that helps me to think that maybe we will have a little bit more context going into episode 9.
Yeah, definitely. It's the Knights of Ren, I think, and the way I want to sort of take this is sort of an interesting way. So the Knights of Ren is a really big deal. It's a really awesome thing. And this is something that JJ teases us with in episode 7. And, the fan community, I think, was pretty curious about them as characters. And then, of course, in episode 8, they're not in episode 8 at all. And Ryan Johnson made a comment sort of saying that they're not in there because it would have been a waste of these awesome characters, because they all just would have been slaughtered by Rey and Ben, okay? And it's interesting to me because we talk a lot about what the plan is as far as with Disney, and how much of this is actually planned, how much of this is just on a whim or whatever. But specifically when it comes to the Knights of Ren themselves, JJ made this comment back in the day where he was like, if I could do one more Star Wars movie, what would it be? I would want it to be the Knights of Ren. And so that kind of makes me think that at least J.J. Abrams had some kind of an idea about what the story is with the Knights of Ren. I assume we're beginning a lot of that in the film, but would you think it's fair to say that we're going to be getting a lot of that in this comic book series as well, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that the comic book is probably going to serve as the catch up from where we didn't get any information in episode 8. We'll probably get that context via the comic series, and then we'll dive into some of the more revealing elements of their history in the actual movie. I don't think Disney would, or Disney Lucasfilm would necessarily put too much of the good stuff, I guess, or the juicy stuff in the comic because they want to save that for the movie. But for people who really are interested in the backstory, people who are really, trying to piece it together and want that full context and that full history, that'll be what they put in the comic.
Yeah, no, it's such a crazy thing, right? Like we expect to learn a lot from it. It's a significant thing, man. The rise of Kylo Ren,
Oh
learning
yeah.
more about that, it's really cool. It also gives me a little bit hope that perhaps more of this was planned and on rails than maybe we had thought. That's
Yes.
kind of an encouraging thing
Yes.
to think about. So yeah, I'm really, really hopeful. I think it's a really, really positive thing. Now, some people will say, and some people get bummed and say that, this is a comic book and some of the stuff should have been in the movies and, this ancillary stuff isn't, quite doing it for it. But I think this has sort of always been more of a Star Wars formula. Star Wars in its canon always seems to be more I don't know. Like I don't know how to explain it. It just goes around. Like there's novels, the comics, all this stuff. It's like a wide tapestry. And all
Hmm.
that stuff has sort of always been a big part of the canon. Back in the day, like even looking at the toys and stuff and look at the description of the toys would be a way that you got some of your Star Wars info. So to me, this feels pretty natural and feels pretty Star Wars to get it coming from a comic, particularly if some of it's going to be paid off in The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I have a theory that only one, maybe two of these issues will come out before the movie, and the other ones will come out after the movie and be like sort of spoilers that'll sort of spoil some things. But what that will do is create an even juicier reason to go read issues 3 and 4. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um,
Definitely.
but let's shift topics into the second here, guys. By the way, Chad, if you could let me know, I don't think notifications went out for this live stream because we streamed so close to the other live stream. Let me know if you guys got notifications or not, because it's an abnormally small amount of peeps in here, but that's no big deal for me because I'm here to talk Star Wars, baby.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, let me know if notifications went out because we'll try to fix that. Set a link on Twitter or something. So let's shift into the Sith Troopers too, because the Sith Troopers, of course, that came out a little bit before Comic Con, but it was still a big deal. It was still a big thing. You know what I mean? People
Right.
were hyped on it and talking about it. There was a big split in the fan community about this because a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's not anything special. This is just a repainting. You know what I mean? A new paint job on the Stormtroopers." I don't fall on that side of it. I think that's actually a really cool thing. But what did you think of the Sith Troopers, man? Because you and I haven't even talked about it. So, what do you think of the Sith Troopers?
Yeah.
You think there's anything to this that it's only in that's just a paint job thing?
No, I don't think so. I think there's going to be a lot that we're going to find out in terms of where they fit into the story. I love them, by the way. The idea of the red trooper, being a Sith trooper. I don't care whose allegiance they end up having at the end of the movie. Just give me more stormtrooper. Like I'm all for it. But storyline wise, I really think episode 9 is going to cover so much ground from a storytelling perspective that this is going to be one of the things that um, we get more information on. I think the sentiment I believe, or my prediction is, the sentiment after episode 9 is going to be, well, why in the hell didn't we get this in 8?
Yeah.
Why didn't we get more of this in episode 8?
Mm.
And I think the more that I look at it, and I think what we're starting to learn, or what we might start to realize, is that this really, not to go super negative, but this really might be on Ryan Johnson and the choices he made with
Hmm.
The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Because a lot of, if you take that movie, if you look at everything in a vacuum and you take The Last Jedi out of the sequel trilogy, and you take a look at the ancillary material and everything else, it's all seems like it's been building in one direction.
Sure.
The one splinter, or the one thing that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, is The Last Jedi, because fundamentally it just goes against so many of the different things that, number one, had been established in Star Wars from the beginning,
Right.
and then two, also that it seems to kind of go against the grain almost of the sequel trilogy, which, depending on what side of the fence you sit on, you either love it or you hate it. Personally, I still love the movie. I feel like it was a great kind of departure away from Star Wars as a normal. But yeah, man, I think with the Sith Troopers, I think that they're definitely going to have more of a role, and I think that we're going to get a lot of that story in nine. And it's just a shame that we didn't get as much of that in eight.
Yeah, I totally feel you. I totally hear you. I think that, but see, like, okay, so there's a couple different ways that you can take that. One of the things is, with eight, it's if they are departing, it's one of those like logical kind of things where if you really think about it, if they are departing from a said plan, if Ryan really was diverging from a lot of different things and he got the okay, then that does kind of mean that there was a plan, right? So that there was
Yeah.
this plan and he sort of diverged from it. I don't think that it's too bad to diverge as long as you return to form. And I think episode 9 in a lot of ways will be that return to form.
Hmm.
Ultimately, the one of the things that 9 can do is if it's amazing and if it takes special care to accomplish this goal, it could make episode 8 a better film, a more watchable film for even people that didn't really enjoy it that much. We'll have to see
Yes.
how that goes down. But as far as the Sith Troopers, I definitely think that this has to do with something that was planned for a while. Like there's just basically one of two options. Like the train of thought that I'm on currently with the theories is that we're gonna find out that Snoke and the First Order and everybody that they were always under the direction of Palpatine. That resurrecting Palpatine and resurrecting the Empire was the goal.
Yeah.
And these Sith troopers, like, okay, so this is really interesting, and we might need some help here in chat, guys. There was this card that was on the Sith troopers in the first day of San Diego Comic Con. It had a description of them, okay, and then Lucasfilm removed that description of them. And the description of them said something like, in an attempt to do total galactic conquest, the Sith troopers are activate, or an army of Sith troopers is activated, and it said something to the effect of they draw power from ancient and evil traditions, like talking about the Sith and stuff like that, right? So that is like that was like pretty crazy when I read that. I was like, man, these Sith trooper guys, it's really possible that they're legit, that they have some power, that they have some force abilities. Like, you know what I mean? Like these guys could be some of the most powerful souped up things that we've ever seen. And I love this idea that they would be attached to Palpatine and to, the Sith and things like that. So I'm kind of all for it. I think that despite Star Wars not necessarily making a huge splash when it came to Comic Con, they did do some good things to start to turn the conversation towards these things of mystery. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I feel like no, they didn't have the big splash that Marvel had, which you really can't expect them to. They're not in the same position in terms of the type of or the amount of material that they're looking to put out. Um, it almost seems like they're kind of holding those cards really close to the chest. They don't want to really reveal anything. Maybe it's that they're trying to give the Marvel movies room to breathe before kind of going full steam ahead. Maybe that's going to be saved for D23,
Yeah.
for Star Wars and the hype for that. But no, I think that there's definitely with the announcement of the comic and that news alone, I think definitely gives you at least a little bit of solace to say, okay, look, maybe they do have a plan.
Yeah.
And that's really at the end of it, kind of the main thing. I think for the fandom in general, as long as we get an excellent episode 9, I think that will forgive a lot of the mistakes and it will really put a different connotation on the trilogy as we look at it, the sequel trilogy that is.
Mm.
So if everybody's been saying it since I guess since episode 9 was announced, but a lot's riding on this movie, so a
Hmm.
lot's on JJ's shoulders. But I really think he's going to come through, and I think nine's going to shock a lot of people.
Definitely, I definitely agree with that, and I'm rooting for it. Obviously, I think that it'll be pretty good. I see some people talking in chat too. A story that broke throughout the week was the reshoots. The reshoots. I saw people talking about that. What do you think about these reshoots? They're said to be going into September. Okay, and this always like makes news whenever there's reshoots and stuff like that. Like what's going on? But what did you think about the reshoots? Is there any reason for people to panic about these reshoots, or do you think ultimately it'll be a good move?
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to panic. I feel like there are reshoots in just about every movie. if it were a situation where we were finding out that they were scrapping the director or something like that, which wouldn't happen with JJ. But if there was a huge, production move or shift, or if they said, "Hey, we've got to recut, the second half of the movie or something like that," but I mean, reshoots become a part of it. It could be something that they want to maybe recontextualize a scene. Maybe they felt like there was a need to add a little additional, an additional scene or something supplemental, something like that. I never get too worried about reshoots unless it's a situation where they're bringing in maybe some outside consultant or something like that to kind of help them restructure a scene or restructure some scenes or something like that. Then I'd be worried. But if they're just saying that they called a few actors back for reshoots, no big deal for me.
Yeah, I mean I'm on the same page. I think that particularly with this movie, you need a lot of special care, and so it just makes sense to look at what you have
Hmm.
and just tighten it up. I mean, like JJ did a lot of reshoots for Force Awakens, and there was just a lot of care put into that. Pretty much, I think he said he put the final cut on that just a couple of weeks before they had to turn it in, and it's just the special care that's needed, particularly with this episode. I think we're both on the same page. So, on that, Salih Alexander coming in hot with the super chat. What's up, brother? Have you heard the crazy new theory that the Rey looks in the mirror sequence is all about the fact that Rey doesn't have parents because she's a clone? Yeah, I've heard that before. It's actually a pretty interesting idea. I think she could be a clone. She could be a clone of any number of people. She could also be sort of like a force creation and one of many. So, like, what if the Emperor was trying to make another Vader, and he just tried again and again and again, and it didn't work. Kind of like Ripley in Alien Resurrection. Bad example, but yeah, kind of like cloning in Alien vs Predator. I also saw Hawks Holocron make fun of me about the thumbnail. I bet YouTube kept the stupid Marvel thumbnail on this, even though I switched it to the Star Wars thumbnail. That's probably what went down. But I hope that it adjusts that. You can just never count on YouTube to do the right thing when it comes to that. Yeah, Daniela says, or Cosmic Force fighting Palpatine and making Rey. Yeah, definitely could be that. I like that theory as well. Which in some ways I think is the theory behind Anakin too. That like they were messing with the Force. It never happened for him. It never worked. But then in response to that, the Cosmic Force was like, bloop, here's Anakin, which is pretty cool. So let's get into some slightly more negative stuff. We don't want to get super negative on Star Wars or just in general on anything. But one of the things, the stories to come out of San Diego Comic Con that does affect Star Wars is the Dan and Dave story. So Dan and Dave, the creators, they're not the creators of Game of Thrones, but they're the creators of the Game of Thrones show. They're writers and they're producers, and important to this conversation, they have been picked up by Disney and Lucasfilm to write and produce the next trilogy of Star Wars movies. The next 3 Star Wars movies that come out will be Dan and Dave Star Wars movies. At least that's the plan for now. So obviously these guys do Game of Thrones. The final season is very controversial. A lot of fans not happy with what went down. And Comic-Con and the panel at Comic-Con was going to be the first time that they were going to have to face fans. And they backed out on this. Now, I did a video on Friday just torching these guys, and it was literally so negative that I actually deleted the video. I was like, man, yeah, it was pretty rough. I was a little too hard on these guys there. But I stand by what I said. It officially upset me so much that they would do this that I literally shifted. Like I was on the fence and I shifted, and I'm like, I don't want them to do Star Wars anymore. Now, look, is that just me being a fan of being angry and overreacting? No. But yes, it is. And I want to know, Al, what your response to this is, and what do you think about Dan and Dave not showing up? Am I reading too far into this? Should they still do the Old Republic? What do you think?
Well, just to give the people a little bit of context, I was not a Game of Thrones fan. I didn't watch a season of Game of Thrones. In fact, Josh and the Dinner Nerds crew actually had me cramming YouTube videos right before season eight's premiere so that we could all watch it together. So that was really my first experience with the Game of Thrones series. And boy, what a series to come in on, because I was like, by the end of it, I was like, what the hell is the big deal with this? So
Yeah.
with Dan and Dave, I mean, the fact that they kind of no show San Diego Comic Con, it really kind of ticks me off too, just from the standpoint that I feel like a series as impactful as Game of Thrones is, you owe the fans an explanation.
Yeah.
At least, to step out there in front of them and at least explain kind of some of the decisions you made, or if nothing else, kind of get them hyped and say, hey, you might not have been down with this, but we've got this thing on the down the pipeline. Some kind of goodwill gesture towards the fans. For you to big time them 2 days out, I mean, 2 days away from
2 days out.
for you, yeah, it's like for you to pull that move, that's you thumbing your nose at the fandom. That's basically saying to me, that's almost they're saying, you know what, we don't care.
Right.
And if you don't care, I don't want you, like you said in the video, I don't want you anywhere near Star Wars.
Definitely.
Star Wars, I love Marvel. I love the MCU. I think Kevin Feige is a genius, but Star Wars is my baby.
Yeah.
Star, just like it is for so many other people. And I mean, I'm the fan that always tries to put a positive light in terms of looking on the bright side. I'm not always doom and gloom.
Yeah.
I liked The Last Jedi. I actually liked Solo. Um, I don't consider myself to be like a Disney shield or anything like that.
Right.
But um, it just for me, I'm like, dude, what are y'all doing? What are you doing right now? What are you thinking? I mean, and what is Disney Lucasfilm thinking? Like, you've got to you this can't just go unaddressed. They've got to at least at some point explain now what was going on with this last season of Game of Thrones, and what happened with San Diego Comic Con. Like, now you've got two things to kind of answer for.
Yep.
But in terms of them and the trilogy that they have with Star Wars, man, at this point, just San Diego Comic Con aside, I'm not too pumped just from what I saw in that last season of Game of Thrones. I've seen, I caught up on a couple, and I thought the stories were excellent. I
Yeah.
thought that up until that point, I like a lot of people kind of questioned some of the decisions that they made in that last season, even though I wasn't, a hardcore fan. I had caught up, and so a lot of knowing the story up to that point, and then seeing how they kind of chose to make some of those choices in the end, I was like, what's going on here? But yeah, with Star Wars, man, it's just like, if this is not what we need. We don't need
Yeah.
another
That's
Ryan Johnson situation. Not
That's
at all.
that's what I'm saying. And like Daniela Torres comes in with a super chat, and it's actually it's a good point that she made. She said they are probably upset at George Martin for not finishing the story. He sold them. RR making money off their writing. I think it was a big fu to George Martin. So it's an interesting situation with George and
Okay.
everybody. But here's what I would say. So Dan and Dave, it's not just that they pulled out of Comic Con. Like, that's a terrible gesture. That's terrible. But they could have done that and then also released a statement. They could have done
Hmm.
a joint video together. They could have done any number of things to address what's going on. Now, right now, I think for my read on the situation is that there's a lot of bad blood between a lot of different people behind the scenes when it comes to Game of Thrones. George is definitely to blame in a large way. I mean, did you know 8 years ago was the last time George Martin released a freaking Game of Thrones book? 8 years
Wow.
ago. 8 years ago.
Wow.
And this homie is out there living the life, man. He's living the nerdy
Mhm.
dream. You know what I mean? Buying weird ass robots from kids shows that he liked, putting up amusement parks, going to cons, getting treated like royalty, and making a boatload of money off of this show. So I definitely think there's a lot of blame to go around. But my thing is, Dan and Dave are
Okay.
ultimately responsible for their own brand, and it's a bad gesture to do something like that and pull out that quick, like with that little notice to pull out. That's
Right.
rude. Like, no, I don't care. Like, no matter what social setting you're in, that's rude. You got to give people notice. There are people that probably paid to go there,
Hmm.
maybe not specifically to see them, but that was part of it, right? That was some of the value that they expected to receive. So I just think it's terrible for their brand, and they could do something. It's like, even if they don't go to Comic Con, do something. Like, you can address the fans. And by the way, how
Right.
refreshing would it be? How refreshing would it be if Dan and Dave got on Instagram and did a little thing where they're like, okay, so here's where we're at with Game of Thrones. Here's what we want to say to the fans. And we also want to be really respectful to everybody. And so we can't really say any more, or something like that. Like, boom. You know how viral that would go? We'd be talking about it on here in the Nerdy News Rundown. Everybody would be talking
No
about that.
doubt. No doubt.
So they have the opportunity. They've got the microphone. It is a sin of omission. And the thing that really bums me out is that's part of Star Wars' problem right now as a brand, like Disney and Lucasfilm. Really, the fact that they
Yes.
let the narratives get away from them and they don't make statements. They don't make proper PR statements. They allow people that represent them in an unofficial capacity to make statements, and then they don't even respond on that. It gets really ugly online sometimes with Star Wars because Disney doesn't do anything to clarify any point about anything when it comes to
You
Star
know,
Wars.
yeah, it's almost to me like Disney still operates, or Disney Lucasfilm operates under the premise that even negative publicity is good publicity.
Sure.
Almost like, at least, hey, they're still talking about it. And I feel like the audience in general and social media has caused that narrative to evolve. I mean, when you look at Marvel and what they do, and how even movies that aren't necessarily as well received, or decisions that are made, that they don't shy away from it. They train their actors and actresses when they do interviews to address these things kind of head on, and then they move past it. They make a badass movie and no one remembers it anymore.
Right, exactly.
And Star Wars, needs to kind of, I think, take some of that and apply it to, that franchise. I don't think you can duplicate or replicate what the MCU is doing, because that's kind of a thing in itself. But you can take some pointers and say, okay, look, we realize that there was this big divide with The Last Jedi.
Right.
Address it,
Yeah.
with your audience,
Mhm.
talk about it, and then say, this is what we want to do going forward, or this is what we're going to do going forward.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing with Dan and Dave. You can do the same thing. They could have done the same thing,
Mhm.
and been over it. But I mean, when you don't do that, you create kind of this air of arrogance, and that just turns fan bases off these days. Like, fans don't want to hear or don't want to see writers and producers or looking down, like, we're making these for you. You should be grateful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. It's an interesting time right now where people are, social media. Everybody has a microphone. You can really communicate with people, and I can understand the tendency, especially for Hollywood people that are sort of old school, to like just
Hmm.
not to be afraid of that and like not want to do it. Like I think a lot of the reason that Kathy Kennedy doesn't, she's not more active like on social, or she doesn't really use like her platform to like do anything for the brand, is because she's just afraid. Like she doesn't understand it. You know what I mean? She just doesn't get social media or anything like that. But like, you know, I don't think it would be too crazy. Like you could hire a PR firm. Like here's the thing. If they were really in some shit, like Star Wars could hire PR firms and make anything sound like smooth and make everybody happy. Like that's just like there are people out there that have that skill
Facts.
set, you know? So
Yeah.
like they could do it. Like they could come out and address that stuff. It's almost like they would rather downplay the divide and downplay the people that aren't happy, which only encourages and makes those people feel worse. You know what I mean? That creates
Right.
a whole different thing, which I think is part of the reason that a lot of this stuff just runs away with them, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, as far as Dan and Dave, I still absolutely crush and be universally praised. And then it comes out and it's very divisive. Solo, which they spent a lot of money to try to really correct that thing back into. Oh no, I think I lost my video. Did I? But they spent a lot of money trying to correct that movie and make it on brand for Han Solo. Like they spent a lot of money to figure that out, and it ended up losing money. Right? It ended up losing money. A Star Wars movie lost money for the first time in a long, long time, and it, they hire the Dan and Dave, and they
Hmm.
say, these guys are so hot right now. Game of Thrones is the most popular TV show of all time, and we got these guys. We're gonna knock it out of the park, and then they become the most controversial figures of the day. And honestly, I think that the D&D hate and the Game of Thrones hate is even worse than the Last Jedi. Like it's hard to quantify it, but I think it's even worse. Um, And so it just blows me away that like now they're in this spot where like they're thinking about their decision and they're like, maybe we don't need this. Maybe we need to sort of play it safe, not have these guys in there. But it's almost too late. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. It's that's my frustration with, Disney Lucasfilm in general. I have actually been a fan of the work that's been put out since, let's say since The Force Awakens. All of the ancillary material that I've been able to read or check out, all the movies, I haven't had any issues with those. The Last Jedi, yes, there were a lot of things in there that I feel like the creative choices could have gone a different way, and it would have totally changed the tone of the movie in terms of how it was received. But I've been a fan of the work. What has really ticked me off with Disney Lucasfilm is kind of the nonchalant nature at which I feel like they're handling the brand,
Yeah,
and the way that they're kind of letting, like you said, the narratives spin so crazily out of control. They do nothing to kind of shepherd the fandom in terms of like you said, controlling the narrative. The whole mess that they had with the solo production. I mean, there was nothing that was done really to kind of quell that, or to market that in a way to kind of put that movie in a positive light. It was almost doomed to fail the moment it dropped.
they didn't even move
And
the date when
right,
the turmoil really suggested that they could have really used that time. They didn't even move the date.
right, and so it's decisions like that that keep that tick me off, because it's almost as if there's this attitude that it's Star Wars, is going to sell anyway,
Mm,
and or we're doing this for the toys, or we're doing this for the park.
mm.
And the thing that gets lost, and I think the thing that drives the fandom really into a frenzy, is it doesn't, at least on the surface, seem like the same care that George Lucas took, whether you love the prequel trilogy or you hate it. The one thing you can't say about George Lucas is that he did not obsess over every decision for Star Wars.
Yeah,
And a lot of times Disney gives the impression that, oh well, this was only done because they're just trying to sell a new toy.
definitely.
Phasma's pointless because they were just trying to sell a new toy, and there's nothing done to kind of dispel that. It's
Right.
kind of like they're like, well, yep, you might be right, but guess what? You're still going to buy the toy, and it's like that attitude is what I feel like is really hampering the brand.
Well, it's so funny that I'm so glad that you brought that up because let's dig into this a little bit deeper because the Star Wars and collecting and spending money on merchandise has always been a part of that brand. So like,
Hmm.
I'm wearing a bunch of Star Wars stuff right now, and like,
You and me both,
right,
brother.
yeah, and when we were at Celebration, that was part of the fun is going around the
Yes.
floor and trying to find the dopest Star Wars stuff to get. And so
Hmm.
there's always been a side of that. When George got the merchandising rights to Star Wars, at the time that stuff didn't make a lot of money, like any of it. George
Hmm.
knew that the studios did not know how to sell a movie, but he knew he could sell Star Wars as a brand rather than just as a movie. And so right
Hmm.
away, there's attention to detail, there's attention to building this thing as a brand and to being attached to this universe and the toys. I mean, I don't have to tell you, the majority of Lucas's wealth was built on merchandising and toys. But there's a difference, and I think that it comes down to what you just said, the respect for the fan. I think that under George's tutelage, it was much more clear how the fact that it broke George's heart that the fans rejected a lot of his stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's where I feel like Star Wars misses what that magic that George kind of brought to it when he was shepherding the brand as a whole. The majesty of making the movies and the story the center of attention, to the point where it made fans want to go out and buy this stuff. I mean, I feel like us as hardcore Star Wars fans, we're gonna go out and we're going to buy this stuff just off of the nostalgia and the hype of these new movies, and the fact that Star Wars is still relevant and we still love it.
Right.
But where I get worried is looking at kids or fans kind of my daughter's age. And yeah, Star Wars is a cool thing right now, but as we know, the attention span now is about that long, so it could be on to the next. And it's like, I don't want to see Star Wars become victim of this shortened attention span type situation that we have with society right now. I don't want it to be a flash in the pan thing, or something that because it's treated so pristinely, because they want to get back to, really making Star Wars movies events as opposed to just these routine movies that come out on a regular basis. I don't want them to kind of get lost in the shuffle because of that. And I think where you kind of ensure that is by putting that level of care on the fans and the story, and getting fans excited, making those appearances, explaining those things, addressing, issues. When you see these questions and Reddit and Twitter and stuff, they've got to have somebody watching this stuff. And if you don't, Disney, hire somebody.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
seriously. And get out in front of this stuff, and control the narrative more.
Definitely. I see Ryan in the chat, and he's talking about Michelle Rejwan. And, it'll be interesting to see what she says. Ryan says, once George left, there's been a lack of a Feige role, and it completely shows. And JJ didn't want that role for the foreseeable future. That's true. Ryan's bringing up a good point. Like, JJ was offered more of a role for that and didn't really want it. He's a producer, but he's really more a producer for these films by name. And some of the people that he works with at Bad Robot are working on Star Wars. That's how Michelle Rejwan even got her job. Now, I want to take this into an interesting situation. Let's get just one more slightly negative thing that we'll talk about, but I'll put a positive spin on it because there was something really cool that happened at Celebration or at San Diego Comic Con that gave me a little bit of hope about the position that our man, Mr. Dave Filoni, will one day have at Lucasfilm. But here's the thing: watching the footage of Hall H with Feige, it is so obvious how this dude he has such an understanding of what it's like to be a big nerd for this kind of stuff, and he has such an understanding of how to present the information, d- drag us along, misdirect us over here, just do every little thing. He knows how to spark the imagination of nerds. Watching him do the panel. I mean, I love Jessica Chobot, but they didn't need Chobot for that panel. They just need Feige to run that panel. He literally is just
Yeah.
the way he delivers things, the timing. He plays to the crowd. He understands. It's just like it's mind blowing to watch this guy who just loves this material. Like he loves comics. He loves comics. And the difference is that the leadership at Lucasfilm doesn't evoke that kind of emotion. I have never seen
Hmm.
Kathy Kennedy get up in front of a crowd or on a video in an interview or anything and say the right thing to get my spidey sense tingling. My Peter tingle for Star Wars never gets
Hmm.
tickled by her. Dave Filoni does. Dave Filoni knows the Star Wars and he knows how to do that really well. Like this he's like a legendary Sith Lord with this kind of stuff. But it's frustrating. I think this is something we talked about a lot, off camera and just, even in our streams for Marvel, is that it's frustrating to watch Feige be this master of hype and this master of producing these things that make these fans so happy, and then see what we're getting in Star Wars.
Yeah, and I mean, really, when you look at Marvel, they kind of had, the best of luck, because how often do you come across a Kevin Feige? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, this guy, he's got the producing, the Hollywood chops, but he's a huge nerd for Marvel. So that's the best of both worlds. They found the perfect person to kind of shepherd that brand and to take it to the places that he's taking it currently and beyond. And you look across at Star Wars, and no, Kathleen Kennedy is not that.
mm-mm.
Like, not even close. And there's no knock on her because she's not a hardcore Star Wars fan. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like to have her position she needs to be necessarily. But what you do have to be in that position is someone who can kind of identify who fits best in those roles. So if I'm Kathleen Kennedy and I know that Dave Filoni is that guy, then Dave Filoni doesn't necessarily have to have my spot, but I'm putting Dave Filoni out front. I'm creating some kind of specific role for him in which I'm giving him the task of basically being the connection or the extension of the fandom.
Totally.
He should be the person who gets in front of these things, who is, whether it's on a yearly basis, whether it's on at it's at D23 every year, at every Star Wars celebration, or whatever the case may be. He's the guy that gets up and pulls the Kevin Feige and says, here's what's coming down the line, here's what we're thinking about doing, or here's what's on tap. and get and whetting appetites that way.
Yep.
And you put a guy like Filoni in that position doing that, and he's going to be, like you said, just as pumped as the fans. Can you imagine having a panel at Star Wars Celebration where Feige is breaking down, or not Feige, excuse me, but Filoni is breaking down the next 2 years of Star Wars,
Yeah.
even if that's two movies and a Disney Plus show. But they really dive deep in, and they do, kind of the same setup that they do when they're talking about the episodic movies, and they roll out the cast, something kind of similar like what they did with the Mandalorian, and they give you some snippets here or some ideas.
Hmm.
That's how you duplicate, or you try to, capture some of that magic of Marvel, is you put someone there who understands what it means to love that brand as much as the fandom does.
Yeah.
And if Disney Lucasfilm can figure that out, and somebody can finally come up with that decision and pull the trigger, then I think this it'll unite the fandom, and things will legitimately be fine.
Yep. Let me give you a little bit of hope here, my friend. Help us, Dave Filoni. You're our only hope.
You are only a hope.
So check this out. One of the things that got me really interested about San Diego Comic-Con was this video that they played at the big it was the big setup for all the Stormtroopers, okay? Now there
Mhm.
was a display, a life-size display that was pretty big of all of the Stormtroopers. And there was a video that was playing on a huge monitor
Mhm.
for San Diego Comic Con, which is what, like 200,000 people. It's absurd. Like, it's just so many people. There was a big video that was playing that was talking about the history of the Stormtroopers. And the
Mhm.
man on the big screen, that majority of the time for that thing, was Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni was explaining this stuff. And of course, it cuts to different people in production, different people in
Yeah.
costuming, all these different people. But Dave
Mhm.
Filoni was the main guy. Now, I think what's happening here is that they are training Dave for taking on some kind of a face of the company role. Now,
Okay.
I saw a lot of people in chat talking about this, like Michael Hall's talking about this. A lot of people are talking about this. Filoni's great, but does he have the experience to run a studio? I've often said I don't think he has the Hollywood knowledge to maybe properly run the studio. But I would argue that the reality of the situation for Star Wars is that running the brand and making brand first decisions is not only more of what they need, they're in desperate need of that, but I think that it's honestly more important just overall. It's just more important. The
Yes.
Hollywood stuff, I think you can get other people to take care of. You can dot your I's and cross your T's. Now, I will say that, like, Feige and Filoni they're just not the same people, right? Like, they don't have the same skill sets. Like, Feige just understands Hollywood very well. He's a Hollywood guy. Filoni is not. But I think that, particularly for what Star Wars needs, that Filoni can be a feather in their cap. And if he was doing something as a bigger creative control and also the face of the company in a lot of ways, I think that would be great for Star Wars. And I think that them putting his face on that big freaking thing, the fact that he is now doing the pilot for the Mandalorian and working very closely with John Favreau. And what's funny is,
Mhm.
like, the way that I read this whole thing is that Dave walks around knowing he's the shit and knowing he is literally, like, I mean, he's living the dream, but beyond that, like, he's an important piece. He's the Padawan. He's the Padawan to the creator. You know what I mean? He walks
Mhm.
around knowing
Right.
that. Many Star
Oh yeah.
Wars fans, the sweaties, like the people like you and I, we know that, but the public doesn't know that. And there's this disconnect between your average fan, the public, and what Dave's perception of him is. It's almost like Dave
Mhm.
already knows he's the shit, but what Disney needs to do is put him in front of people more so that they understand that. Because all this
Right.
dude has to do
Right.
is open up his freaking mouth and talk about Star Wars, and
That's it.
The Star Wars fans will be like, okay, this guy gets it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, and talking about John Favreau, I mean, what better way, or what better of a partnership there than, maybe give John Favreau the responsibility of the production side of it. Maybe he takes more of a role in Star Wars going forward, in terms of the from the Hollywood side, because he definitely has. that experience and can do that. And then you give Filoni, the ability and the freedom to just get out there and do what Filoni does best, which is put put out great Star Wars content and get fans pumped about it.
Yeah.
And that's what, for me, I agree with you 100%. And hopefully, that's what they're doing. Maybe they do see that. Maybe that's the long game for them is to kind of put him in that position to where he can have more of a role with, responsibilities having to do with hyping up the stories and so on and so forth. So yeah, that would definitely, be awesome, be the dopest thing that they could kind of do. So fingers crossed on it.
Yeah,
Fingers
fingers
crossed.
crossed. I think that you will slowly start to see that happen. I'm telling you, start to look on social media for more pictures of Dave Filoni with other high profile people, maybe even Hollywood people, throughout the next
Hmm.
year. I bet he's on the track that when Kathy can, I don't think so. I don't think he'll get the president job. But
Okay.
I think that in 2021, when Kathy's contract is done and she steps down as the president, I think that whoever they get as president at that point, that Dave will also get a massive promotion sort of right along with it. So that
Right.
the narrative can essentially be Dave Filoni takes over for Kathy in some way, even though that's not really true.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. No,
So
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I think that's the move. I think that's what I would do if I was in charge of the brand. But if I was in charge of the brand, I'd be doing a lot of different things. So that's it, guys. That's pretty much all. The one thing we didn't talk about was the Tie Daggers. Let's hit that real quick. Did you hear about these things?
No, no, no. I missed out.
So the Tie Daggers are these new Tie fighters. They look as though they might belong to the Sith Troopers because they like got all red on the wings.
Okay.
And they look like a normal Tie fighter with triangular, like sort of the triangular wings of a Tie Advanced,
Okay.
but sort of shorter, and they've got like the red on them.
Hmm.
But
Interesting.
yeah, kind of interesting. I think they could be associated with the Sith Troopers. They could
Yeah,
be somewhere
definitely.
else. I do hope that we get to see them in action, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, and other than that, I'm actually proud of Star Wars at San Diego. I think they did some good things.
Yes.
It still doesn't wipe away some of the bad things I think they've done. But yeah, I think they had a good showing there, and I'm really hoping we get this trailer soon. Trailer soon would be
Yes.
incredible, and just ride some of this hype. The mystery around Palpatine, the Sith Troopers, the idea of Kylo Ren. There's a lot of cool stuff. Continue to build with that, and I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't the last I'd say 6 months to a year haven't been the best for me in terms of how Star Wars has kind of handled the fandom, so to speak. But again, in terms of the actual content, I have been thoroughly pleased. Some of those ancillary novels have been incredible. Matter of fact, I haven't read a bad one yet.
Yeah.
So I mean, and you've got so many. I think they just announced what was it? The Thrawn treason novel got teased,
Yep.
and so it's like they're hitting all the right notes in terms of giving decent or better than decent content. What they need to do now again is just quiet this storm of doubt within the fandom, and I think that comes from again just the Last Jedi and the divisiveness that came from as a result of that movie. But again, episode nine has
Oh,
episode nine the epic conclusion that everyone hopes it will be,
yeah.
and no one will talk about episode eight anymore.
Yeah.
You will shut all of that up.
Or yeah, at least the conversation would focus. You would hope that at least the conversation would focus to how good nine was, and then eight can still be in the conversation. Because the thing is, I don't think that the Last Jedi. I don't think we're ever going to stop talking about it. And by the way, I think
Hmm.
that was Ryan Johnson's plan the whole time. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, guys, we're going to leave it for there. Let us know if you're watching this on the replay in the comment section. What do you think about the news for Star Wars? What do you think about some of the things that Al and I talked about? And yeah, we're going to call it there, guys. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day. And I'll see you in the next video.